Gonna go on another chainsaw adventure today. Gonna head back down to Shamokin, New York and visit Bob. You know, sometimes when you start exploring new things in life, it feels like you're going down into the fog. And I think that's the theme of this video, because we're going to be talking about Autotunes today. And for most people, it looks and sounds and feels a little bit like this. But you know, Bob had said something to me early on, and it's really true. They're still just chainsaws. You still have the mechanics and the physics of a chainsaw. You just have the addition of the factories trying to make things more consistent with the Autotunes. Boy, look at the reservoir, how far low it is. This is the Prepacton reservoir. It's part of the New York City reservoir system. Wow. Alright, subject for the day is that murky subject about auto-tune carburetors on Husqvarnas. I'm going to grab a little bit of this. And fortunately, being at one of the premier Husqvarna shops in New York State, we have a tech and a situation that's legitimate. It's real. Where we have a saw here that has had some work done, and Bob needs to both update the software but also take a look and see what the service life has been on that particular saw. So in the process of doing this operation, he's also going to bring some other bits of information to the table. For example, some differences with the 550s, the two different carburetors on the 550s, but also some of the some discussion on the older carburetors for the 562s. And I'm going to ask a whole bunch of dumb questions. And hopefully this will be interesting.
Yeah, they're not going to be dumb. They're not going to be dumb. But this is the new modern way to tune chainsaws. You do like, remember that Honeymooners episode where they did their own TV commercial?
Yeah.
You know, with the handy household? That's what this is. Yeah.
All right. So he's logged in. This is the first screen that he gets to. And he's actually going to plug in the saw.
A couple things to look for first. Now, the reason I was starting to say a lot of guys want to know, that thing's fading away there, but a lot of guys want to get this thing. It's totally useless. When we turn this on, we're not logged into the computer here. We're connected right to the mothership down in Charlotte. We're connected to Husqvarna.
The computer term is you're a terminal to their system.
Whatever. I mean, and anytime you log in, if there's any updates to any of their firmware packages, it automatically downloads those updates, and so you're constantly up to date. Every time you connect to them, you are definitely up to date. There's nothing showing here because we're not connected to anything. We're going to connect to a 562. This is what a 562 carburetor looks like when it's out. There's two connection points. This is the original one that was on just the 44s. It's a pain, as you're going to see when we look at the saw. It's a pain to get in and out of here without taking the carb out. So they've added the second connection point, which is the one that you're going to use when the carburetor's in the saw. So you want to bring that over here. This is a little connection point here where we're going to plug in. All right, you can see way down there is where the white one is, and that's why that was a royal pain to get in and out of that.
So this just sits here free all the time?
No, you plug it in there. I just unplugged it. See the little terminal right there? It goes in. All right, so what we have to do is plug this in. Now I should point out that this saw was rebuilt from the junk pile, so it's a collection of a lot of different saws. Let's see. Okay, they found what this thing is. It's starting to read the data, and it's figured out just what this thing is or what it says it is. All right. We don't really need to enter any customer. If you wanted to do right here, you could write down customer information here. so you always know who this thing belongs to. This one, believe it or not, is already up to date. And what we're going to do, we're going to look, this is some of the information that you can take a look at. This is your basic. It tells what your, that part number there, that is the product code, which is the product code is like the real model number, not 562. There's your serial number and the manufacturing date, 37 week of 2014. Over here it tells you which, a lot of this information is pointless, but it tells you exactly what carburetor you have, the Autotune module, and what firmware version you have in it. Operating history. This is how much time is on this carburetor. Again, this saw has been, there's parts from like 6 or 7 different saws went to make this thing up. We kind of create a little monster here. This saw has got 142 hours plus runtime on it. It's been started like 2,200 times. You can see the some of the maximum temperatures, what the current fuel settings are. That's kind of within range. If you wanted to do a default reset on your fuel settings, which we're going to do, these things are probably going to change to like 75 and 75. So we're just going to hit reset on that. And you just watch the little green bar go over. 75, 75, and that's cool. Let's see, let's check for error codes. There could be some error codes in this thing, which is why we had it lit up. Error code 17, and it was practically 1,000 starts ago. The rule of thumb here is if you got an error code that was over 30 starts ago, then you can pretty much ignore it. Again, this carburetor came out of like whatever, the saw got run over or blew up or whatever it was, so we don't really know what that error code means, but we can look it up. So we go over to documents here, and Autotune error codes. We're going to get, what did it say, number 17? Let's see what 17 was. Let's see. C cylinder, piston ring is stuck, high friction in, faulty carburetor. So yeah, that was a pretty serious error code.
Not good.
And that probably was something that really, but yeah, that was on whatever this saw previously was, whatever this thing was hooked up on before. Then it does show you what all these different error codes mean. Probable cause, what you can actually do. Some of these, like this 15, I've never seen that one, but this is here again. There's things that can happen just by not cleaning your air filter, and it'll sense that there's certain things going wrong there, and so you can get an error code just from a dirty air filter. A couple things here. Those, they'll tell you like you can have a clogged spark screen. They're showing they've just started adding some of these in. I expect there to be more of these. And give you an idea what some of your carbon buildup would be. That really shouldn't be happening in your cylinder. You could have a deformed diaphragm in your pump. So there's just more information here than you really know what to do with. But they'll show you a couple of things like carbon buildup on a cylinder. We can kind of dump this right now, okay, and close that one. Now this saw has been rebuilt. So whatever that error code was and whenever it happened is kind of useless now. So we're just going to reset this, and this is a totally new entity now. So we really don't need to have any error codes on this because they no longer apply. Let's do some tests here. This is what you could previously do if you bought the Diagnostic tool. In addition to reading your time that's on there, you would be able to perform these tests because there's no data really that's needed. If you want to do, say, the throttle sensor, just grab it. It's just checking the throttle position sensor. That's okay. The temperatures, that's about what it is in here. And then the fuel valve. You hear that little clicking sound there, which means that your fuel valve is working okay. Then you can just hit stop. And the test is over. Now this thing said it was up to date, so I don't know if we can really do a firmware update here, but this is how you update the firmware. You go in here and it's going to ask you some questions. Now since it's up to date, it's answered all the questions. We're going to plug in some old thing here. If this wasn't up to date, you would get the first few lines here. What would be missing would be this ignition module. It would ask you which, you know, because there's different coils that could be in this saw. So it asks you what ignition module you have. And what you have to do to answer that question is you got to pull your starter off, and you got to get the part number off the coil, which is right there. And you just key that in, and then it'll update the firmware. Where's all those dumb questions I was going to get?
They're coming.
So I guess we got to plug in something else here to see if we can get something that's really out. I got some old carburetors here that.
Well, on these 562s, you have what, 3 carburetor revisions or more?
What do you mean revisions?
46.
There's a 44, a 46,
48,
and a 48. And then on the 555, there's like the 44, the 46, and then a 47.
Yeah, mine's
right?
good. Yeah.
There's a lot of different. And you can't. Another shop down the road, who's a steel shop and should stick to steels, tried to fix one of these, and they're trying to fix the 550, and they ordered a carburetor for a 545, which is a different carburetor and different part number.
They probably did it because it was cheaper.
Well, they probably did it because they don't know what they're doing. And I don't know why they're working on Huskies. Maybe they don't have enough work as far as the stills go. So what they did is they tried to do that. Problem is you can't put a 550 firmware package into a 545 carburetor. It won't let you do that. And and another deal what you're doing is you can't buy these carbs and take them out of the box and put them on a saw. All right, let's plug in something else here. Now this is going to freak out when I unplug this.
Let me get that on there.
And tell me that I unplugged it as though I didn't know. Uh-oh, you have disconnected the product. Okay, I have read the warning. All right, let's connect a different product here. This is at just a box that was just laying on the ground, and this thing, it looks like an EL44, and I don't know what it really came out of, but we're about to find out. I bet you this is not up to date. But we need an example of something that could be updated, so we're going to see exactly. We don't really know what we got here, but we're going to find out in a second. Okay, it's searching for the product. Now I realize that most shops, can't really do this, but you really need to be able to do these things to keep these saws running. Now, we'll ask the question a minute ago, like if you have a saw with an EL44, do you need to update and change the carburetor? Probably not, unless you have some major issue with it. If you got some little thing that's maybe not running right, it's worth doing the firmware update, which really shouldn't cost anything. I mean, I don't charge my guys for it. And that may solve the little bugaboo problem that you have without having to buy a new carburetor.
So that one's plugged in.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what we got here, so let's find out what it is. This is from 2013, so this is a few years old. All right. I don't know what this was. This must have been reset at some point. This thing only had 2 hours on it. This might have been one that got run over. Let's see if there were any error codes here. There were no error codes. Yeah, in a shop like this, we got so many saws that we sell to these pro guys, and a lot of them suffer devastating damage with trees falling on them, running over by the skidder, things like that. We'll go back to operating history. The fuel settings are not really that far off. Actually, the last carb temperature was low. But let's see if we can do a firmware update. Okay, so this one's not up to date, so all this stuff is blank here. Okay, it's an EL44, so it's obviously a Husqvarna. This was from it's a 46. It's actually written on the carburetor here, but without the magnifying glass, I couldn't really tell. All right, so this thing is not up to date. Let's ask, okay, what ignition module do we have? And we're going to put that one in. The 001 is the one you see most commonly. We don't really know what saw this came out of because it's just a carburetor sitting in a box. All right, but that's the most common coil, so we're going to pick that. Firmware version, that definitely needs to be updated. Okay, so you just hit update here, and it's going to take just a little bit. This green bar is going to start flying across there. That's not exactly flying, but that's really what that's really all this is. And any dealer that knows how to do this, I mean,
because it's a German computer instead of a Swedish one.
What do you mean it's a German computer?
Just
This is really not too big of a deal to just plug this in and keep your customer saws up to date. And this will probably change down here too. It should say that firmware version 1 is definitely not. Firmware update succeeded, and down here it'll tell you update has succeeded. And so now this thing is up to date, even though half the parts are missing. I don't really remember taking that off, but maybe Joel did. But this thing, yeah, you know what? You can tell this thing got hit because this is not supposed to be loose and hanging there.
Broken.
So this thing got crunched. You've seen a lot of the crunched saws. All right, questions from the gallery. That's it. That's the basics. This is everybody thinks that this is like some big mysterious thing. That's really not a big deal. Now I know if you're a guy that's in an area where you don't have a dealer nearby, or maybe your local dealer's an idiot, doesn't know how to do this. You know, maybe that's kind of a problem for you. I understand that. But, you know, I'm not a technical guy. I don't have a smartphone. And if I can do this, it's not that complicated.
Well, here's a couple of questions. First, reiterate again the different carburetor versions that were on the 562s. 44, 46, 48.
Right.
And was there a reason, or was there something they were trying to target with from 44 to 46 and from 46 to 48?
Yeah, they're improving the running characteristics, some of the dead spots on acceleration, idling issues. Some of the, they changed the mapping for some of the hot restart things that they were doing to improve some of that. Well, they changed coils, so interfacing with the different coils had to be changed.
Well, where I'm going with that is with the firmware updates, and it seems like they have continued to update even the older carburetors. That means that there's a potential that if you have a small glitch that's supposedly characteristic of a 44, that by doing the firmware update you might solve it. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah. So you may be able to correct a minor problem just by doing what we just did there, updating the firmware, without having to buy a carburetor for $80 or $100. So,
and I guess another angle at this is just because you got an old saw with a 44 doesn't mean you have to just get rid of it.
No, you shouldn't.
You might be able to make that carburetor work just fine.
Yeah, there's so much nonsense out there. You know, somebody will tell you that one carburetor is really better than the other. Somebody that's going to have, not every 44 had an issue, a small percentage of them did. So somebody that has one that has no issues say, oh, the 44s run the best, mine's been great. Well, okay, good, you know, but and that's true. That doesn't mean that they're better. You got to get over here close again. There's something else I got to show while we're still playing with this. I'm going to plug in a blank carburetor that's new out of the box, and it's searching for the product. Now, this thing here, okay, this is what happens when this is a new out of the box carburetor. There's no firmware in there. This carburetor, you know, it doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have a soul yet. And it doesn't know what it is. So this is why, like if you catch there's no firmware in there. The thing just will not run right. There are dealers that have issues. They don't know what they're doing. They put a new carburetor on, and it's not a question of firmware needs to be updated. There's nothing there.
Okay, so it won't carburetor. It simply won't work.
Yeah, you've got to load firmware into this thing. And of course, when you do that, also this thing doesn't have an identity. So this is when you enter the product code and the serial number of the saw that this is going to go on.
Okay. So there's no sense in doing that right now.
No, we're not. We can't because we don't know what it's.
Okay. Okay. Well, now the next question is, so with 562s, the carburetors you're going to see are the EL44, 46, and 48. And just because you have an EL44, don't panic. It's not like you have to go throw it away and get a 48. But since there's firmware updates, it's worth getting that done. Yep,
if it's never been done, it should definitely be done.
The second issue is, let's say you have one that's working just fine, and you do an update, and for some reason, and I can't come up with a reason, but let's say you want to go back. You can't. You only go forward. Once you've updated, the software doesn't give you the ability of picking and choosing what package.
Yeah, when you get an updated firmware file, you don't have the old files.
And
it deletes the old files in favor of the updated one. There'd be no reason to want the one that's not updated. Just because something's been changed doesn't mean that you need it.
Bingo. That's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, and just the fact that, you know, some carburetors in some conditions, they just made them better. But the idea that because a carburetor becomes superseded by something else, it's an improvement. It's not like a recall or a warranty fix where every, you know, thousands of saws, just because we change something, that you have to get the new one. If the saw's running fine, just keep running it.
Okay. See, that's where I was trying to get to, because you're going to have the bling crowd who always wants to have the latest and greatest, and will assume that they're going to have some earth-shattering difference as they go from one version to the next. And what I'm trying to get here is that you're not. I mean, a good running EL44 is still a 562 running good, and a good running EL48 is still a 562 running good. And if they're running properly, you're not going to see a big difference.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
And that's what I'm trying to get to. And same with the 550s and with the two versions they have.
Yeah, if you got a saw, I don't think it's quite right. And first thing is to get the firmware updated. If something's really bugging you and you want to buy a carburetor, go ahead and buy it. But your problem may go away. If there's a serious problem, it may go away. But you can still buy, you know, some of the older carburetors, not all of them. You can't buy the 46. It supersedes up to the 48 now, I'm pretty sure. I think you can still buy the 44, but I'm not sure about that because it's been a long time since I ordered one.
Well, I'm reaching here a little bit. Is there things symptomatically that you can point to that says, okay, it's worth a guy coming in with a saw that does these things for a firmware update?
If you don't like the way it's accelerating, if you got a dead spot, and an update isn't necessarily going to solve that, but it's the first step that you take.
And a dead spot would be...
the same way if you have like a little discomfort in your chest, the first step you might take is like an antacid pill. You don't necessarily have a bypass operation. So, you know, so you can't overreact. You can't overreact to some of this stuff.
Yeah. So, theoretically, for example, I lay the saw down, it stalls, and it keeps doing that. And it's an Autotune. And I can't really adjust anything. And I come complaining to you. What are you going to do? You're going to want to plug it right in and see whether or not...
Yeah, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to see if the firmware update will solve the problem. You know, and you can't, and there could be something else going wrong that has nothing to do with the carburetor. I told you where I recently got fooled thinking that the carburetor was bad, and what it was is that little primer line. And I put some pictures on one of the sites on this. This is your little primer line which draws the fuel through the carburetor, and then it goes through the primer. And what was happening, it was loose. The primer line was just loose on this connection, probably an ethanol reaction. And instead of sucking fuel, it was sucking air. And it's just, oh, it keeps dying. And, you know, your first reaction is, well, it must be a carburetor. You know, but it wasn't the $100 carburetor. It was like the $3 primer line. You know, so part of this is diagnosing it. Is the problem really the carburetor itself? You know, is it time to change the fuel filter? The little things. Like I said, I got fooled on that one.
Well, when we started this, I asked Bob to tell us what it is and tell us what it isn't. I think I can add what it isn't. This isn't a tool where you can go in there and start messing around with your timing curves and your fuel curves. You basically get something from Husqvarna and they put it on your carburetor. And
yeah.
this tool allows that to happen. And fundamentally, you have to trust that they've been doing the research, and when they think it's an update that's worth having, they put it on the central system, and when Bob goes in and logs in, he gets that update. And but this is not something like you see guys on TV with their cars where they take the little laptop and they sit on the side and they start at different RPMs say, I want a little more fuel, a little bit less, or a little more timing, a little bit less.
No.
There's
some geek that's probably thinks he's smarter than the people in Sweden and everything else, and is going to want to do that, and that's fine, you know. But
what it is it is the first step when you have these new saws, and maybe it's hard to start or stalls, or you know, there's a lot of the issues that are carburetor related that you might run into. This would be the first step, is to come into a dealer and let them just check, because also with those error codes you might find a clue there and save yourself a whole lot of problems. That's the net for me. This is a really easy first step on diagnostics for a lot of people with their saws.
It's really simple, and there's you know, sometimes they found some stuff with 550s that, you know, because they're using them in bucket work and stuff, if they spent an awful lot of time idling in the bucket, it would start reprogramming itself for all the dirty air in the bucket, because it was, you know, feeding it. It was just regurgitating all its own exhaust. So, you know, sometimes if it's spent enough time doing that, it just wouldn't run right.
Well,
and
here's some
to be cleaned out, and you could really just like cut it in some big wood, or here again, that's where you would see your fuel settings are all out of whack.
Well, there's some diagnostics. So here's the kind of dumb questions that an engineer is going to ask.
Well, I've been waiting for them.
Well, we answer a lot of them just by doing what we did. For completeness of information, what saws have the Autotune feature that this system can deal with? Just the 562 and 550s, or are there others?
The T540 top handle saw.
So those three saw models.
Those three platforms, and in any red Johnsrud versions that are in those families. So and the 465 Rancher.
One of those. That
Just
uses
the 465.
That uses this system here.
Yeah.
So 465 Ranchers, 555, 562s, 550s, 554s, and the Johnsrud counterparts.
Yeah.
What about the 576s?
576 is the early generation Autotune, generation 1 they call it, and it's not programmable. You can't plug into it.
So that is one that you could buy online and it would be pre-programmed.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the exception.
This is one of the 550 carburetors.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we can do what we want to do here. Let's see. This is a blank one. All right, and to answer your question, first it's going to ask you whether it's Husky or Johnsrud. Okay, where are we going with this? And then it's like, what model is this going in? And there's all the models.
There you go. Look at that.
That have a programmable carburetor.
Okay, that answers that question. So anyway, I think that's good stuff.
Yeah, it's really not. It's not that big a deal. It really isn't. What do you think?
I think that's a wrap. I think that.
While we got these out, we got to do this too. These are the 550 carburetors. There was the AT1, the AT7. There's a lot of talk online about a secret adjustable point. It was only on the early carburetors on the 550s where there was a little adjustment behind there. All right, that's gone. They don't have that anymore on the 7s and the 12s. One important thing, if somebody wants to update their 550 to the newest, to the new 12, which I don't think is necessary unless you have an issue. If you really have, you can have a bad carburetor. You can have a bad carburetor in the same way you could have a bad carburetor on a 372 or 346 or 288 or anything. You could have a bad carburetor for all the same reasons that you could have a bad carburetor on those older saws. Because when this is not on a saw, it's still a carburetor. And things can get clogged, things can get oxidized, corroded. That stuff can happen. You know, so a lot of times a problem with this is just an old-fashioned carburetor problem. It has nothing to do with the electronics right here. And the electronics have almost been flawless. It's just typical carburetor things, and everybody wants to blame the voodoo in the black box. If you buy the new and say, you know what, I want the new AT12, it's going to come with a fuel line in the box. The reason it is because they've made a change here. I don't think they've done this, or they're going to do it on the 562s. I don't really know. But on all the 550s and 562s up until recently, this is your nipple from the carburetor that goes into the fuel line, and the fuel line was previously anchored into the flange on the intake boot that holds the boot in place. And then you just kind of slid it in like that. Well, they've got away from that. For some reason, they want a free-floating line in there. So now your fuel nipple, instead of going out straight, now comes down at an angle here on the new AT12, which is why you have this different fuel line. You don't have to change it. The other thing it says, it probably says it in this instruction sheet that's in the box, which most people don't bother to read.
Let me see if.
But you can take what they tell you to do is you got to, if you don't want to use this fuel line, you got to cut 26 millimeters, or just about a ½ an inch off of your, maybe 3/8 of an inch off of the existing fuel line. If you don't, and you try to use the old fuel line, which I've seen other dealers do, you're going to get a kink in it, and it's going to cut off your fuel flow. Here, let me open that up. Let's see. There it is. If you got the old fuel line in there, you got to cut off about that much.
Good information.
And there's all the Autotune carb control is unprogrammed. To use the carburetor, it must be programmed with firmware.
And we're back to the beginning of the discussion.
Which was?
The firmware.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay. Well,
yeah, firmware's got to be there. I can't stress that firmly enough.
no pun intended.
No, yes, sure it was intended.
But you got to be a dealer too, because you have to have access to their
it's like
the mothership.
now that's how it works, and I understand there's still going to be some people that don't like it because they're not in control and they don't really have any kind of decent support locally. You know what? I get it. You know, this is what it is, and there's still going to be some people that say, you know, I want nothing to do with it. Well, that's fine. You know, you can run older saws. There's still a few things you can get, but you know, this is kind of the wave of the future. Remember what, you know, if you open the hood on a '69 Charger versus opening the hood on the new ugly thing that they call a Charger now, they look they look a lot different. They look a lot different.
Well, I think we better shut this video off pretty quick.
Why?
We're going to start talking about Chevy, Dodges, Fords, and what's ugly and what's not. I like my Dodge.
Well, I like it too, but it's not a, you know, the new Chargers. It's a waste of a classic name.
Okay,
right.
We'll wrap this one up. And I think thank you very much for an overview of this mystery subject. And turn this into a video.